I beat an apple.
I'm Dylan, I beat over BBA.
I'm Matt, I beat coffee.
I'm always seen that being close to the top.
I'm John, I beat pasta.
I love it. You're all types. Oh, Mackenzie.
I'm Mackenzie. I'd be a jackfruit.
Wow. So I'm Shaw, and I would probably be a flaming hot Cheeto. This slide that you're seeing here is actually a slide I used in a presentation in a job interview, a job that I actually did get, so it works. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself and kind of how I ended up at Google from, going to Cal and doing really different things. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I've learned, and then we'll do a little acting based on real life circumstances. So I actually grew up in New Jersey, and the reason that the cigarette thing is there is because my town was called Marlboro, exactly spelled like the cigarette company. So we refer to it like Marlboro, like the cigarettes. I was born in Toronto though, so that's why Drake's face is there. I'm Iranian or Persian, and that's why the 300 movie thing is there. Although we don't look like that, it's still there. And I'm really interested in pop culture and social networks and branding, and that's why McDonald's is there. It's one of my favorite brands. And I love flaming hot Cheetos and blue Gatorade, although it's so terrible for you. I love it. And my name, I go by Shaw or Shasha, if you know me really well. So a little bit about, I graduated from Cal in 2012. I was going to graduate in 2011, but I took a victory lap. I said that I was taking a year to write a thesis, but I actually wrote my thesis in like 3 days with no sleep. So I spent a year taking a bunch of classes that I was just interested in. Between 2011 and 2014, I started a blog with a friend of mine that dealt with issues for Middle Eastern millennials. We did a bunch of stuff, published weekly content, then brought on several other writers. Started this primarily while I was in school, but carried it on after I graduated as well. Right after I graduated, so my major was ISF. Any ISF? Yeah. What's your focus?
International development.
Nice. So mine was consumer behavior and culture. After I graduated, I went straight into finance/consulting. It was this weird intersection. I was a private equity analyst at a private equity consulting firm. And I went from Berkeley to living in Sacramento, which is the opposite of Berkeley. And it was quite a culture shock in terms of living in a new city, but also going from being in school to kind of setting your own schedule and lifestyle to working at a finance job, which is, even if you don't have work anymore, they expect you to sit at your desk. So it was very different, and I can talk more about that if you guys are interested. So I was there for a year, and I decided, okay, finance is really interesting in terms of looking at all the companies that these big firms are investing in, but I'd rather work at one and do cool things or kind of be on the ground. So I was looking into, and this was really early, this was around the time that Snapchat was becoming big, and this was before, I guess, maybe it was around the time that Tinder was also coming out, and it was around the time that a lot of apps were looking into location-based discovery. So imagine you're walking down the street or you're at a cafe. Right now it doesn't seem that strange to you to be able to kind of pull up and see who's nearby. But back in 2013 or even 2012, that was kind of creepy. So there was a startup called Highlight that was essentially trying to do different iterations of an app that helped you know who was nearby. Now Facebook has a feature of see who's nearby now, but at the time they hadn't actually released that yet. So I worked on developing a marketing strategy for one of their apps that was going to target college communities called Flash. Now, that was a big failure. It didn't work. That's why none of you guys have ever heard of it, Flash or Highlight. The technology was still pretty valuable, and they got acquired by Pinterest 2 summers ago. But yeah, nothing really came of the app or anything like that. So, and that tends to be a trend with startups, FYI. So then I went on to Google after that stint ended, and I've worked in 2 different areas. I started at Google in the ads division, so this is the logo for AdWords. I've been on different sales teams, and I've also been on sales operations teams. So I kind of leveraged my background in finance because I was analytical to do some operations work. But being in sales is extremely valuable because you get to hear from the people who are actually using the product, which a lot of the engineers, and Google is a really big engineering focused company, they're not really in touch. So that's really valuable. Now I work at Area 120, which is actually the workshop for our experimental products. So every company knows that there's value in startups. There's value in people trying different ideas and failing. Facebook has Building 8, Intel has Intel Labs, and Google recently started Area 120. So the reason it's called 120 is that Google generally has this policy that you come work, on your core job. Let's say I worked, I was an engineer for the AdWords side, but I could spend 20% of my time doing something that I found really interesting. Maybe I wanted to work on Project Loom, maybe I wanted to work on self-driving cars, something like that. Now, 20% of your time in a job that's already pretty demanding is not a lot, and you can't really develop something that's full-fledged or that you could bring to market. So 120 is a place where you can take a 20% project and spend 100% of your time on it. That's why it's called Area 120. So it's really cool. This program's been around for about a year, and I work on an app called Uptime, which is a YouTube app to co-watch YouTube videos. YouTube is a big part of the Google ecosystem, and this is the first app that's targeting teens and tweens, because most of Google's products are actually targeted at what we call young affluent techies. So this is kind of the first app to come out that veers away from that target market, which is really interesting but has its challenges. Any questions this far? Feel free, I don't want to talk on and on and on. So I know this class is about entrepreneurship and starting your own business, or being able to kind of control your own destiny. And obviously I work at one of the biggest companies in the world, and that is kind of paradoxical because I go into work and ultimately I have certain goals I have to hit for the good of the company. That's why the question is, can you be an entrepreneur at a big company? No, most of the time no. But it is the fastest way to learn and grow your network on your way to running your own business. So when I was in college, I was running this blog, and going to a startup afterwards, or even a small finance firm, a lot of the times things happen very quickly, and that's how startups are. They happen very quickly. You sit next to an engineer, you tell them, oh, I think this doesn't look great in the product. I talk to a user, this or this or this. Or I have an idea, let's go into a meeting, let's talk about it, let's execute. At big companies, it doesn't happen that way. You have to talk to a teammate who then will take it to that other team's manager, who will then take it to the VP, who will then come back to you a week later, and then you have 6 meetings before the end of the year, and next year you can maybe see your idea happen. That's kind of how, once you get bigger, around 50,000 people, that's kind of how it operates. So the skills are pretty valuable, though, that you get, because you learn how to manage your time, how to think. A lot of the times, like companies, I think, in college you learn one way to think, which is really valuable, and then you go onto these companies, and then you really realize, okay, how do I take what I learned in school and apply it in a valuable way? Now, that's a really important step before running your own business ever, because if you don't know how to apply your knowledge, you're not going to be able to actually create anything of value. And I think a lot of the times we struggle with learning about theory. I remember when I went to Cal, I learned a lot of theory, and then at Google, I've learned how to take theory and make application out of it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think in terms of entrepreneurship, it is a good way to get exposed to a lot of the things that you need to learn to be the CEO of a startup. or to be a CMO of a startup. And you can't really get it elsewhere. Now, in terms of networking obviously at these, it's a lot easier. Just like at Cal, it's really easy, right? You guys are all peers. You all want to help each other. And once you leave here, I get LinkedIn messages all the time from Cal students, like, hey, you went to Cal, like, can I have a coffee chat with you? Can I talk to you about Google? Can I talk to you about this? It's this common bond that you'll always have. Same thing when you go to a bigger company. A lot of times you're bonded over the fact that you work, you have the same employer, and people want to help. So it's a great way to build your network and find people who have similar ideas, similar passions. Working on Uptime, we're a team of 7 people, and we really believe, our thesis is that watching YouTube together is better than watching alone. And that's something that if we all, maybe we would have never met had we not all worked at the same company. Is that? Okay. Any questions? So real talk, because they told me to do real talk. Okay. So while you're in school, these are a few of the things that I think thought about, and I was like, I wish I could. Enjoy yourselves here, because it doesn't get any better than this. Literally, like, you guys are setting your own schedules. College is amazing. Anyone who says, oh, it's cool outside. It is, but college is really a golden time in your lives. I really believe that. Don't be so concerned with what happens after, because it all does work out. I think something I learned really early on is checking your ego. And rejection is really important as part of learning how to check your ego. You're not going to get every job you apply to, just like every person you date doesn't want to date you. It's the same thing, You go into an interview, and the person's like, I don't think I see a fit here, and you could really believe that you should work there. And they're like, no, and you just have to take it, and you have to walk away, and you have to go to the next interview. And it's the same thing while you're being employed and while you're at work, or while you're at a startup. While we were at the startup, I worked in kind of doing the business development, and I had to knock on so many doors. Currently, right now, I look for, ABC, Disney, I'm looking for content deals. The door gets slammed in my face all the time. Even though I'm coming from Google, it's like, oh, we're not interested in doing this right now. But I still have to, part of my job is the next meeting, the next meeting, the next meeting. So I think learning how to check your ego, and to be real, when I started working at Google, there was a lot, they hire in a certain way, so there was a lot of, Ivy Leaguers, and it's interesting because it's a skill to learn how to check your ego. Like, you're like, oh, I came from Princeton, I came from Harvard, and even from Berkeley, but soon enough, I think you learn that it's better when you're humble and people listen to you more. Next is hustle for what you want, not for what you don't want. And that's I hustled really hard to get that job in finance, but I didn't want to be in finance. I just did it because I thought that's what I had to do. So I think if I had directed that energy maybe back towards the blog that I was working on, maybe I would have been able to monetize in an even more profitable way. Maybe if I had channeled that energy to finding a creative job that maybe initially didn't pay, but maybe I'd be in a different position. I'm not regretting anything. I'm just saying you should have an idea of what you want and you should hustle for that, but you shouldn't hustle for things just because you think that that's the story you should tell. Does that make sense? And then be self-starting, not self-sabotaging. So, I think it's really great to, not need someone to tell you what to do, especially once you leave college, you want to prove yourself. And that's really important because a lot of the times you come into the workplace and people want to underestimate you because of your age. You're young, this fresh out of college kid doesn't know what they're doing. That's true, and you want to make sure that you're performing at a level that, you impress them, but don't do it to a level that you're sabotaging yourself, where you're not asking questions, where you're not actually learning what you should be doing. I'll give you an example. When I joined the startup, I didn't know anything about how to develop an app. I didn't know, what engineers worked on every day, what a designer did, what a UX designer did. These are all things that were really new to me, coming from finance. And initially, I put it on myself. I should know this, and I'm not going to ask because I'm going to look stupid. I'm already young. I don't want to come off more stupid than I actually am. But that was to my detriment because once you start asking questions 3 months in, they're like, wait, you didn't know this all along? You know, they're like, how come you didn't ask like day 7 on the job when we were talking about this? So be a self-starter. We'll get to that. Be a self-starter, but don't. But make sure that you're still, aware that there's a lot to learn, and that's okay. And people want to help. A lot of the times, the best way you can grow your network is by asking questions. Going to the person that you're interested in self-driving cars at Google. Hey, how does this technology work? I know nothing about it. Email the person, maybe the head of like Eng for self-driving cars. And again, if they reject you, it's fine. You move on to the next thing you're interested in. Lastly, help others, not because they'll help you, but because it'll make you better. A lot of the times I've done things for people, or people have asked me to do things, and when you think about it, you're like, well, why should I do this? They're asking me for a big favor, it takes a lot of my time. And then if you start thinking about it transactionally, like, oh, well, maybe this person will make it, and then they'll help me. Maybe they'll be Evan Spiegel's number 2, and then I'll want a job at Snapchat, and they'll help me out, so I should be nice, and I should do what they ask me. But a lot of times, if you help others, and not look at it in a transactional way, you'll actually go into it learning things. For example, I helped one of my friends who works at a completely different startup with her UX research, which means going in and researching people who are starting to use an app for the first time. It was a field that I know some things about, but I was like, oh, well, it's going to take up a couple of my weekends. That's okay. I did it. I learned even more about her app and the space that she's in, and things that I could take and use in my job or my day-to-day. Any questions on the real talk? You guys all look dazed. Like, is this all cliche? Tell me. Try to not be cliche. And the rainbow emoji. So the entrepreneur life, and I use the word entrepreneur loosely because, like I said, right now I work at Google, but I work on this small project with 7 people, and half the time shit is hitting the fan. We have no idea what we're doing, and what happens with these projects is that every 6 months we have investors or our partners come in and say, let's look at your metrics. Oh, that doesn't look good. We're done funding you. Go find a new job. So with that in mind, this is kind of what it feels like. It's like everything is on fire all the time. Everything is urgent. I need to be doing all the things all the time. And like for example, our investor review is in mid-October. So I'm daily, that's on my mind, like this existential crisis of like, oh, if my project gets defunded, then I'm out. While also thinking about, well, this app, the product needs to get better, and who should use this app, and all the things that trickle down into what my day-to-day is. And then I also have my life to think about. I'm like, okay, what should I do in my career? Uptime is great for now. What's my long-term goal? Do I want to live abroad? Do I want to go down the track of staying at Google for another 10 years? Like there's so many things and so many balls in the air. It's really tough. And I was having lunch today with this guy who's starting his own thing, and he started a couple startups in the past since he was 13. And he told me today, I was asking him like, oh, like how did you go about targeting high schoolers, things like that. He's like, I wish I could tell you that I knew going in that this is what we were going to do, but we literally get up in the morning and we're like, okay, I think this is what we should do now. And that's really like, you just kind of make things up as you go and fake it till you make it. And that's life. It's stressful and you get a lot of gray hair and it's okay, but big risk, big reward, they say, which is the case with startups. And I think kind of being your own boss, you do get the satisfaction of, hey, I made this and I was part of something. But like I said, it just had its drawbacks. I don't mean to be too discouraging. I just want to be very, very frank about what it's like. Any questions before we hop into the activity? We have some time. Or maybe we don't have time, but yes.
What are like the long-term goals of Uptime, or what can you see it being in the future?
So I think the Uptime's thesis, as I said, or the hypothesis is that watching YouTube together is better than watching it alone. How many of you guys watch YouTube? Great. But most of the time what you do is you hop into your app, or you hop into the YouTube app, you watch a video, it's funny, you send the link out via Messenger or whatever else, right? I think the long-term vision is that YouTube should be more social, and not just YouTube, but all video. All video, whether it's live or on demand, it should be more social because it's better that way. If you guys think about an application like House Party, right? House Party has changed, what we consider hanging out with your friends, because now you can do it when you're not in the same room. But with YouTube, you really can't do it when you're not in the same room. Like, if I left right now and said, hey guys, let's all watch this YouTube video together, you don't know if I'm actually watching it or not. You don't have any visibility into that. So I think that is the long-term vision of bringing that technology into the mainstream. And we just have to make sure that our Google partners are bought into that vision at all times. So, yeah.
So for Flash, that was the one that was like targeted towards like college, 18-24. What went wrong?
Good question. So what went wrong was the fact that, I'll be really honest, the team didn't get along on what the vision of the app should be. So there was some, the founder wanted Flash to be like a Snapchat, but very much like anonymous posting. Well, I guess Snapchat's not anonymous, but anonymous posting within college campuses. And part of the team felt that that was really ripe for bullying and would have really bad consequences for campus community. So I think, and it's something you learn if you work like really closely with engineers, product, and then you're like, business development, is that if engineering isn't bought in, nothing will happen. So that's kind of what happened, is that engineering wasn't bought in, and there was this like really big division. And as a product manager, you can try to win over your engineers, but if they fundamentally don't believe in the vision, they're going to go elsewhere because they'll get paid really well elsewhere. So that's kind of what happened, yeah.
So how did you target like college students? Like, did you go to colleges? How were you able to get that?
We can revisit that after the activity. How about that? And I can tell you. Yeah.
Do you recommend, or based on your experience, do you wish you would have gone to more of a startup like coming out of college, because you could always settle down at a big company versus going the other way, tends to happen a lot less?
It's a good question. I think it's kind of what, for me, I wish that I had actually gone maybe to a bigger company right away. I worked for a few years before going to Google, which I think is helpful too, because you don't want to fuck it up when you end up like at a really good company and you don't have any work experience. Sometimes we can do that. But I think going to a startup right away, sometimes you might feel like you're not able to add as much value as you would if you had been trained under the best. Like, let's say you want to get into marketing, right? If you go to, I don't know, one of these big traditional media agencies, maybe you learn marketing from the best, and then you go and work at a startup. You're able to, you're going to get hired at a better position, and B, you're going to add tremendous amount of value versus, I think, and I don't want to deter anyone from going to a startup because I think there's a lot of gains to be had going into a startup. I just think, looking back for me, I want to take more risks as my life goes on versus less risk. And maybe that's the inverse of what
Do you have plans on monetizing the blog?
The blog? Yeah, we do actually in video format, which kind of aligns with what I'm doing in my day job. Yeah.
Oh, so you still have it?
Yes, it's still live. It's not like active, but we're going to try a different avenue and disseminate content. Yeah.
How did working on your blog in college help you kind of either discover your skill sets or develop your interests to help you get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it just built my confidence because I was all of a sudden really out of my element where, what we did was we made merchandise with like some of our logo on it, and we started selling it, and then I had to talk to like this logistics company about how to ship that and all of that, and and running a blog, I learned CSS to like how to format the blog and things like that, and then monetizing it through ads. Like that was my first exposure to digital advertising. And then managing people, so managing writers, that was really, things that I wouldn't have really, no one would have allowed me to do, at least paid me to do. I was able to learn through blogging, and writing was my first passion, so it allowed me to do that. So yeah, I would say that, and that's actually how, so they say pit stops are powerful in your career. I would say that the blog was one of the main reasons why I, when I went to Area 120, why the partners were like, okay, like we believe that I can be scrappy, because I was like, listen, I've done things in the past that, I've had to be scrappy for.
You talked a little bit about how the idea process in a big company can sometimes like take a while. And I was just curious, like, how did it happen for you, and how long ago was this idea born, and like, did you have the idea, and how did you really get from AdWords to Area 120?
Not easily, I would say. So the idea came out of, and like I said, every company has its like incubator. YouTube actually had an incubator called Pilot Studio, where they would try all these different ideas, and one of their ideas was like, you could put a face on any YouTube video that you wanted, like you could take your face and put it on a popular YouTube video. So that was like a technology that they piloted. And Uptime in a very different form was something that they tried out, and they were 2 product designers and 3 engineers on that, and they were essentially also coached by Area 120. I went to a demo day, and I was like, listen, I'm really passionate about Snapchat, really bullish about it. I think that this is really interesting because Google has not been successful with social networking at all. I bet none of you use Google+. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. And I think, I had a lot of opinions about what the product looked like at that time. And that's when they were like, oh, wow, like, there's perspective here. And I joined their team, and at first I actually wasn't full-time. I was still doing I worked on the agency partnership team, so I was still like traveling like all over and doing my day job, and then I would also 100% of my time would be dedicated to helping them kind of iterate on this project, and then slowly transition to full time, because I think it's a process. Anytime you want to laterally move or just move in general within a company.
Do you think your team is more productive knowing that you're going to be evaluated every 6 months?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How does Google decide what company or what projects are going to be under the 120 umbrella?
That's a really good question for the partners. I think that it depends on a few things. One is, how does it help Google's bottom line? It's a business. How does it help the world? Because Google also cares about its users and the world. And also, is it like a really new idea, or is this something that you could spin off into, like, an extension for Gmail? That's something that wouldn't be as interesting as, I guess, a technology. Yeah.
Could you go like straight to Area 120, or do you have to be like an employee at Google and then like transfer in?
So the program is really young. There's no real, like, I wouldn't say there's rules. I have a couple people or friends of mine who joined directly into Area 120. I think it's kind of tough though, because you have no Google network, and then you come in and then you're always kind of waiting to get, not to get terminated, but if they defund you, you don't have as cushy of a network to rely on to say, hey, like, my old manager says I could have my job back in the meantime while I look for another one. So if you come in fresh, I think it's really exciting, but it could be a disadvantage if it's not a good project, or depending on what standing it's in. Let's move on to the activity really quick, because I think you guys will have fun with it. So this is Uptime. This is like our branding. Okay, so you built Uptime. This is a very, very real scenario, and we just hired all of you guys as CMOs. Congratulations. So who has an iPhone? Raise your hand. Wow, can you guys defy the 50%, Android, iPhone? Actually, it's more like 70 something. Any Android? Okay. Cool. So if you have an iPhone, take it out, go to the App Store, and search Uptime.
Oh,
wow. Download the app, and what I want you guys to do is get into groups.
some good ASO here. App Store, App
Optimization?
Yeah, it's good.
You know, companies like nowadays there are companies built off purely like wanting to do app store optimization, and they take $2,000 from these startups like each to do that.
Is it on the French App Store?
No, it's not. No, we're Australia, Canada, US only. Sorry. But you know, once you've downloaded it, raise your hand. And the reason I want you guys to download it is because I want you guys to see the product, because you're gonna figure out what you're gonna do with it. Raise your hand if you've downloaded it. You've got it. Raise your hand really high if you've got a username already. And sign in with your Berkeley email addresses. Because they're all attached to Gmail, right? You guys use Google Apps?
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how pink is it? It's really pink, isn't it? Hot pink.
I love it.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. Raise your hand once you've like signed up and it's all good to go. Brownie points if you can find me on the app. All right, looking for raised hands in every section once you've signed in. Your username. It's the side of the room. So why don't we start here with like before you guys have it downloaded? Or if you can't, that's fine. Okay. Debbie, you want to? Oh, and we got donut holes while you guys work. Oh yeah, you found me. High five. Downloaded, username. Okay, why don't we have you guys, you four, and we'll have you downloaded. We'll get four back there.
1, 2, 3. Wait, is it this one? That's one.
Did it work?
Wait,
Download it.
1, 2, 3,
I got
4.
you guys.
So let's first group.
Okay. Well, in terms of the target audience, we're thinking just from opening it up, I would say, we said like 12 to 14-year-old girls. Yeah, just the pink, not too like gender stereotype, whatever. I love all neutral blue, green colors, but I think like just from my experience, like with Instagram, Snapchat, and other apps, YouTube even, like it's very neutral. And for this, like the sparkles and like everything that I, as a 12-year-old girl, was super into.
Yeah.
Kind of jumped out right away. So.
Okay, so that's ideally you start. Right. Any other thoughts?
And then do you want to say?
Oh yeah, we just had like a thought when I first opened the app. There were like two different sections, and I thought it was gonna be like the top was gonna be a FaceTime with someone, and the bottom was gonna be the video, so you can kind of like see the reaction of your friend as they're watching it too. So I was like a little bummed when there was no FaceTime.
I hear ya.
So we sort of agree with the other group of like defining the target audience. Ours was a very similar definition. More in terms of like marketing and how you would reach an audience of that age is kind of a more interesting age range, because you sort of have parents that are in play with like different app decisions and stuff, reaching out to younger kids. But girls especially, we thought that if you had any connections to different social media influencers or prominent celebrities, etc., that you may have met over the years, that's like a super easy way to leverage your product with zero marketing. If you can like personally call them and be like, hey, can you like help like with our product? But I mean, you never know.
Yeah,
Just
no,
double
good
you. So that was kind of the direction that we took it back.
Yeah, influencer marketing is huge at a price nowadays. I actually read yesterday that if you have over 1 million subscribers on, well, YouTube is different. Instagram actually is cheaper to buy, not to buy a person, but to kind of buy their posts or whatever. But YouTubers, you know, they're premium. So like someone like Jake Paul or Logan Paul would charge like $100K easily for to like endorse your ad or endorse your, yeah. So, but around $1 million, it's like 75K, 50K.
So, okay, sort of an idea that sort of came up with that though is like, there are a lot of girls that are like younger tweens that like are gaining like a large audience that have their own YouTube channels, so you could do features on them, on your app and promo them that way, not necessarily like pay them, but have sort of like a mutual like agreement where you could like expand your followers through that.
Totally.
The target audience was like less than 30, and if I'm gonna run the company, I need to keep all the sections of the company busy. So the engineers will be working on making a private to public feature. So if you're public, you can everyone watching the video can talk with each other. This is especially good like for Khan Academy videos, so like lecture videos, and we can talk to each other. And then there's a private mode, which is like how it works right now with friends and stuff. And on the other hand, like for marketing, I think there should be an expansion, because I mean, although I have an iPhone, nobody uses the App Store. It's it's like very rare. So it's mostly Android, and then we can expand in Chrome. So Chrome has those extensions, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So the extensions would be very useful. Yeah, that's kind of.
Great.
And so if you want to like market on social networking, since Google owns YouTube, so we can just like market on YouTube itself.
Might just have time for one or two.
Yeah, let's do one or two more. And really quick, all of the ideas have been really great this far. You guys are on the mark, so we'll go with you guys.
Like how will you reach them? I often don't respond to ads, but I will sometimes watch like cool Instagram videos. Like if I'm scrolling, all of a sudden it's a video, not an ad. But if the video like transitions into an ad, or like let's say it's a funny video and you actually think it's funny, and then all of a sudden, boom, it shows you in the app, and then you share it with your friends, and then shows the app. I think that is probably
like more of an organic.
Exactly. Yeah.
In terms for like priorities for the first 3 months, I would say definitely focus on user retention, because I mean, if I go into an app and I hate it, I'm never going back. So I would say focus on making sure that your users really like the user interface and actually like have like really good experiences with it, because then they'll start coming back, and then they'll transition from maybe going just to YouTube to going to Uptime.
Right.
And then
I want to take all those, but I want to respect the time as well. Let me get to the last slide, and then whoever wants to stay back and hear, that's great. So thank you all for hearing me out, and hopefully it was really beneficial for you all. Obviously, Uptime is a new app. You guys are not necessarily the target demographic, but your insight is still valuable. If you guys use Uptime for 2 weeks and want to tell us what you think, that would be great. You can be part of a focus group, come on site to the Area 120 offices. It would be really valuable for us. And we are hiring, so if you guys are interested in some part-time roles and things like that, definitely feel free to reach out to me, and my card's right here. But I do want to make sure that if anyone